So the first thing we should do in any economics introductory course is to discuss what is economics. So economics is the study of how individuals and societies allocate limited resources to satisfy unlimited or practically unlimited wants. Um, so do we really have unlimited wants? Um, Maybe not in any particular good. So if you think about soda, for example, you may not really want an unlimited quantity of soda, but if you think about more broadly, sort of globally speaking, um, could you always do with more? Sure. Right? So we at least relative to how much we have of something, what we want seems limitless. Um, so another way of saying what economics is to say that it's a social science that studies how people behave or how people make decisions. So let's break this down a little bit more. So economics is the study of how individuals or societies allocate limited goods to their nearly or practically unlimited wants. Limited goods. We have limits on goods because of something called scarcity. Scarcity is the inherently limited nature of society's resources given society's unlimited wants and needs. So even if you think about it, even things that we take for granted, like water, which is pictured here, here in the U.S., uh, for most of us, water is something we can just turn on a tap and get, right? But think about worldwide. Is that true? Tell that to a child living in a rural village in in West Africa, uh, who has to walk a mile from their house every morning to go get some water, and that water may or may not be clean. It may or may not cause them to have illness. Um, Tell that even here in the U.S. to a child in Flint, Michigan, right, where clean water it was is has been some in some places still is hard to come by. So yeah, if you think about things, even things that you feel like you may have enough of, on a grander scale in society, we consider them those things. Almost everything is scarce. We have scarcity, limited nature of resources. So economics exists to answer how then we divide these things up. How do we divvy stuff up? How do we allocate what we do have? Among the everyone who wants it, right? Um, so how do individuals and societies make decisions about what to do with these scarce resources? Economics, as you probably know, because you registered for this course, this particular course is Principles of Microeconomics, but you had an option to sign up for Principles of Macroeconomics as well. Economics is divided into these two broad categories of micro versus macro. What does that mean? Well, in econ, micro and macro mean the same thing as they do as prefixes in any other field. For example, the picture shown here is of micro versus macro biology. This is a picture that I took at the Sea Turtle Center in Jekyll Island, that was describing the difference between micro and macro organisms that live on the shells of sea turtles, right? So a microorganism is something very small that you can't see without a magnifier of some sort, and a macroorganism is something that you can see with your naked eye that's much larger. So for micro and macroeconomics, it's very similar. It's just a matter of perspective of whether we're looking at something from sort of the bottom up or from the top down. If we're looking at things from a sort of small perspective or an overall big picture perspective. So microeconomics is the study of individual units that make up the economy. These individual units aren't necessarily individual humans, so it can be. It's a focus on individuals and how they make choices, but also a business, an individual business, or even an individual industry. So, for example, how does a rise in sales taxes impact the retail industry? Retail industry may seem like a huge industry that impacts impacts our economy as a whole in the US, and that's not necessarily untrue, but if we're looking only at that single industry, the retail industry, we're asking a microeconomics question, as opposed to, on the right-hand side of this slide, macroeconomics. So macro is the study of overall aspects and workings of an economy, a focus on the big picture. For example, is the economy of Japan in a recession? So a big question about how are these things affecting all the industries at once? How are these things affecting our entire economy, or Japan's entire economy in this example? One picture that I really like for talking about this is this. Some of you may have done a jigsaw puzzle like this before, and they are real pain in the behind, right? It's a big picture. If you step back, what you see is the American flag here. If you zoom in a little closer, you see that each little square is made up of its own picture. So up in the blue, up at the top, the sky here is made up of little pictures of airplanes or boats or even some animals standing in front of a blue sky, right? And then the red stripes are made up of little pictures of flowers and things that are red. So it's a big picture made up of a bunch of tiny pictures, and this is economics. If we're talking macroeconomics, we're talking about the American flag here, the big picture. If we're talking microeconomics, we're talking about the little squares, the little pieces that make up the big economy. And you notice if something happened to the big picture, it affects the little squares, right? If I took this red stripe here and I decided to paint it green, that affects little pictures, right? It affects the little guys to make a big change to the big picture. But at the same time, if I took just one little square and turned it green, it affects the big picture. And so there's an intimate relationship between microeconomics and macroeconomics. They work together, and a change in the macroeconomy affects decisions made on a micro level, and a change on a micro level can have an effect on the macroeconomy. And really, they're just studying the same concept. It's all studying this picture here, but from a different perspective. Are we looking at what's going on in the little squares, microeconomics, or are we looking at the picture as a whole, macroeconomics? So the rest of this chapter or unit is going to be focused on these foundations of economics. There are 5 principles that economists return to constantly as we're thinking about what's going on in the economy, how people are making decisions, and what's going on. And those are incentives, trade-offs, opportunity cost, marginal thinking, and trade creates value. And I'll make individual videos to follow this one where we'll zoom in on each of those 5 foundations of economics.